So steak tartare can be a little bit of a daunting dish. I mean, it's raw meat and that might freak you out a little bit, but it really shouldn't. And if prepared properly, it's a super delicious dish. Today, we're following a recipe from Anthony Bourdain. It's in his Les Halls cookbook, and it's also from the super famous restaurant that he was the chef at way back in the 90s. This dish is so iconic that Anthony Bourdain says the entire reason that restaurant was created was to serve this dish. Let's find out why. Let's get started. So let's deal with the elephant in the room when it comes to steak tartare. Is this a safe dish to eat? Short answer to that is yes, absolutely. This is a perfectly safe dish to eat. You find it in tons of places in France and really around the world. There's no reason why you can't make a really delicious steak tartare at home. But the longer answer, we'll come back to that in a few minutes. First, we need to deal with our dressing. You might think the steak is the starting point or even the most important part of a steak tartare. It's the first word right in the name, and don't worry, we'll get to that. But the first thing that we need to deal with is the tartare piece, which is the dressing. So we need to create a dressing that's really gonna amplify this whole dish and bring it all together. And if you grew up where I grew up, probably familiar with tartar sauce. And not only does it sound a lot like tartare, it's actually where that sauce fundamentally comes from. What is a tartare? Well, it basically starts off with a mayonnaise. We're gonna start off with some egg yolks. I'm just gonna crack these and separate the egg white from the egg yolk. Then I'm gonna add a little bit of mustard and some anchovies. The anchovies are really gonna amp up the umami flavor in this and not really make it taste that fishy. It's sort of a salty deliciousness. You can cut these up if you want. I like just putting them in whole and then basically whisking this all together. They're gonna break down if you whisk hard enough. Now we need to amp up the flavor a little bit. And we're gonna use a lot of different things, but one of them might surprise you, and that is ketchup. Just regular old ketchup. We're gonna put a little bit of this in. Then we're gonna add some Worcestershire sauce, Worcestershire, Worcester, however you say this, bit of Tabasco, and then crack in some fresh pepper, and then we're gonna whisk this all together again. Now here's where we make it the mayonnaise. I'm gonna take some neutral flavored oil and basically slowly start drizzling this in, whisking constantly while you drizzle, and slowly but surely an emulsion will form. Make this super French, I'm gonna add a little bit of cognac as well. This is actually brandy, it's Spanish brandy, but don't tell anyone. You can leave this out if you don't wanna add the alcohol. And so that's really the first part of the tartar sauce, or the tartare sauce. We're gonna amp this up with even more flavor now. So first things first, I'm going to take a bit of onion. I'm trying to cut these down basically as finely as you can. You don't want really big pieces of onion, but don't worry if they're a little big. It's not the end of the world. It's still gonna come together really quite nicely. The next thing that we're gonna add is one of my favorite little French, I don't even know what to call it. It's a fantastic ingredient. Got them right here. These are cornichons. Ugh. It's basically these little pickles. They're really delicious. You should be able to find these basically at any grocery store. If you can't find them, sort of regular pickles or anything like that will do. It's a French dish, and these cornichons really make it more authentic. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut those down as well, basically trying to make them about the same size as my onions. Just cut off the tips, cut them down one direction, pile them up, turn them, cut them down the other direction, and you'll have them cut into nice little cubes. Then I've got a few capers here. This is sort of like that anchovy. It's really gonna amplify sort of the salty taste and really help balance everything out that we've put in here so far. Last but not least, I've got a couple of sprigs of parsley. Just gonna give it a sort of more of a fresh taste and add a little bit more green into the dressing. So the second component of Anthony Bourdain's steak tartare is choosing the right steak. So this is a piece of sirloin. This is in fact the cut of meat that Anthony Bourdain recommends in his cookbook. There are a few different cuts that you could use. Tenderloin tends to be really popular as well as sirloin. There's not a lot of fat on this piece of meat. In fact, tenderloin tends to have even less, which is why some people prefer that, but we're following Anthony Bourdain's suggestions in this video. What matters even more is that you get a really high quality piece of meat. Now, after all, we're eating this raw. Where the problems come is if you happen to buy something that's not the freshest, or if you happen to buy something that's used with tools that aren't sanitized properly. So I bought this at the butcher that I go to all the time, and I know that he takes really good care of all of his products. How can you tell if your meat is fresh? Well, there are a few telltale signs aside from just going to to a high quality place. You can see how red this is. That is one of the first sort of telltale signs. The really bright red, that really rosy type color tells you that it's a really fresh cut of meat. When it starts going brown or gray or those types of things, you don't want to use that in a tartare. The second thing is the smell. Now, I know you can't smell this, but it smells... It doesn't smell like a whole lot. It certainly smells like beef. It's got a really fresh smell, which I guess is probably the best way to describe it. And I mean, you'll know right away something not smelling fresh or not smelling like beef. If you get any hint of a smell being off, that steak isn't for a tartare. In fact, it's probably best just to throw it in the garbage. So we have a dressing, we have a perfect cut of meat for the tartare. We can move to the third and final step of making a great tartare at home. So first things first, I'm gonna put my plate into the fridge. It's gonna cool down. You wanna serve this dish pretty cold. And what Bourdain recommends that you do in this is cut the steak by hand. Not only is this a really good time to practice our knife skills, putting it in something like a food processor or something like that's just gonna chop it up and it's gonna grind it up and it's not gonna be very good. So we want a really, really sharp knife, and what we wanna do is cut this down into cubes. It's gonna be up to you how big or small you make your cubes. It's really a personal preference, but the way that you do it's gonna be the same regardless. I'm gonna cut against the grain to start off with, basically trying to do this in one long stroke and trying to avoid a sawing motion. A freshly sharpened knife will help you do this easily. If you want, you can cut these in half like I'm doing here. Then the last thing that you do is rotate them basically the last way and cut these down into small cubes like this. So all I need to do now is cut down the rest of this meat and combine everything, and we'll see if Anthony Bourdain's steak tartare is as good as he says. So this is absolutely fantastic. It's like being at a bistro in Paris. Anthony Bourdain really knocked it out of the park with this recipe. I think the texture's just right on. The dressing is fantastic. This is an absolutely incredible recipe. That's all for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time. Super tasty.